Hi everyone, I'm Mehdi, and today I'm going to talk about foundation models for the brain. I think a lot of speakers already mentioned the subject, but a keyword that I've noticed come up a lot was scale, right? How do we scale these models? What is the type of data that you want to use to train these foundation models? And what are the emerging capabilities that we want to look for as we scale these models? And so what I want to propose here is that we should embrace more of the heterogeneity in order to be able to achieve this critical scale that we need to scale these models. And to make my argument, I want to start by walking us through kind of the trajectory of language modeling. So with language models, initially we start with the specialist models that would be trained on a specific task and a specific domain. For example, we had models for translation, models for classifying emotion in product reviews, models for question answering, etc. And then eventually we start moving towards these models that are pre-trained on something like Wikipedia, and we found that performance improved then. And then eventually the main breakthrough was realizing that in order to achieve scale and to continue to improve the performance of these models, what we could do instead of just continuing adding more of the same data is combining multiple data sets across these multiple tasks and multiple language domains in order to train foundation models for language, right? And this wasn't necessarily obvious back then, it's obvious for us now, but it was important to be able to leverage this heterogeneity in data in order to achieve that critical scale that gave us foundation models for language. And so what I want to argue is that for neural data, we also kind of want to have the same thing, right? So scale, we obviously don't have internet scale data, and so one way to do this is to just try to leverage as much as possible and cover as much of the neural data sets as possible. The other benefit that would also give, the heterogeneity would also give us is robustness, right? So if we can spend millions of dollars collecting the same amount of data, the same data from the same device for the same use case, but eventually we want to cover other devices and new generation of devices are going to come out, things are going to change, and we don't want to do this process every single time we have a new technology, right? And so having models that are able to ingest all this heterogeneous data could be one way of ensuring that they work across multiple systems and continue scaling together. So instead of having one lab or one foundation model per lab or per company or per device, we would have models that are more broad. And so now the question is, how do you find the scope of the data that you want to train these models on? When I say heterogeneity, I'm talking about the heterogeneity in sorts of data sources that we're using for training these models. Currently, we mostly record or train models on multiple recordings. Sometimes we expand this to combining multiple data sets across different labs. We could go even further by training models on different devices or different device configurations. We could also include more tasks and more context, all the way up to training on multiple brain modalities. So this could be single neural resolution all the way up to non-invasive EEG data modalities, or even behavioral modalities that are related to the brain. So, but the question is exactly how to define this scope, right? So how do we actually make this happen? So for language, when we think about code and comments on Reddit and scientific papers, everything can be represented as a one-dimensional sequence of words. So it's kind of a straightforward problem to combine or have a model that ingests all this data. But for neural data, we have different devices. So we're going to have devices, even for the same modality, let's say electrophysiology, we're going to have different number of channels, different sampling rates. When we talk about modalities, we're going to have different signal properties and different ways of tokenizing this data that we need to think about. But most importantly, when we usually record from the brain, we're also recording other stuff like behavior and video and biosignals, etc. So we need to figure out ways of building models that are able to ingest different sets of data streams, right? Like be able to ingest data from multiple different data sets with different combinations of modalities. And so this is kind of what I've been working on for the last few years, is building the architectures and the techniques for tokenizing these data sets in order to efficiently scale across multiple heterogeneous data sets. And the second thing, which is also important, is being able to build the right engineering stack to make this happen, right? So when we start talking about multimodal data with multiple streams of unaligned modalities, both regular and irregular, and with interval data labeling kind of like events, etc. We need to have an infrastructure that allows us to efficiently do data loading, create a batch quickly from different data sources, and efficiently scale these models on multiple sources of data. And so we've been slowly releasing these open source tools that we've been developing internally for exactly this purpose, which is building these multimodal foundation models. To just give you kind of some evidence that I think is really results that showcase that there is benefits in training on mixtures of data. I've compiled a few of our results. So the first one is we find that, for example, if we train a model on multiple different types of tasks, we see that the one model that is trained all these tasks usually outperforms individual models trained on each task separately. We also find that, for example, when we want to decode imagine handwriting in humans, having a model that also is trained on monkeys performing various reaching tasks actually helps with performance. So we find evidence when we combine these different sources of data and benefits of doing this to achieve the scale that we need. Also here we have examples showing how performance scales as we combine multiple modalities, in this case electrophysiology and calcium imaging data, again showing that potentially the optimal solution would just be to collect the same data for one modality and one device. But given kind of what we've learned from language and what we can possibly do as a community is to focus on combining as much of the data that we have to be able to continue scaling and seeing these emerging capabilities. So to summarize, I think we should really think about heterogeneity when it comes to scaling neurofoundation models. And also this would be an opportunity to leverage the data that we already have to inform kind of the future data that we should be collecting, right? Understanding the performance to cost ratio of different data types, different contexts, different devices, that should be really useful when you try to collect the next data sets that are missing for training these models. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cool.
So when you're trying to figure out the data ratio, the best data ratio from a heterogeneous data source, what do you think is the most principled way to explore the space of mixtures?
That's a good question. It's really hard because we obviously don't sample the entire space of mixtures currently in the same way. So it's going to depend on the data that we already have available. Right, yeah. So I think it just requires training medium scale models on different mixtures and doing it empirically. We don't have a formula right now for being able to predict what will work or what will not. So an interesting thing that we found, for example, in the Allen Brain Observatory dataset is that pre-training models on inhibitory neurons actually is way better than pre-training them on excitatory neurons, even when you're decoding both. So having data from one thing is better than others. And we also have transfer matrices showing what brain regions we should be pre-training on that will give us good performance across the board. So there is differences that are not necessarily intuitive is what we're finding.
One way to reframe the question is do you think it makes sense to try to assemble building blocks to improve performance, or start with the kitchen soup and then ablate modalities and see what doesn't cause problems?
I think the first, yeah. Try to combine have small number of combinations at the beginning and then seeing how that works. I think ablating would be hard. I don't know. Yeah, that's my answer for now.
Great. We have time for a quick one.
Can you say a few words about training on what to achieve what goal? I'm thinking about different monkey experiments in different labs, using different task paradigms. We actually are thinking about using a computational model that can replicate and account for data from different labs. So it sounds like the same flavor as what you're trying to do now. But is your model able to predict behavioral performance, for example, in some cognitive tasks?
Yeah, the question of what these models will be able to do as we scale them is still not clear to me. I don't think even in language we're able to necessarily predict what are the capabilities that will emerge first. I can tell you about interesting properties of these models that could be beneficial, for example, in the case of monkeys. Basically, these models, once you pre-train them, you can then easily and very efficiently fine-tune them on new data sets from other labs. So we can think about this as the same way that language models have democratized access for these pre-trained models that you can just fine-tune very quickly on new data. It's kind of the same idea where you don't need a lot of samples or a lot of new data in order to adapt it to data from new lab, for example. So that's one of the benefits of having these models so far. But we're not seeing necessarily, for the case of monkeys decoding like doing motor control tasks, we're not seeing like these huge jumps in decoding performance because we're already reaching, I guess, the ceiling of performance in those types of tasks. But we're definitely seeing improvements in fine-tuning performance when we have limited data. Thank you so much. Thank you.